There's this classic scene from the British comedy Monty Python and the Holy Grail. It's always made me laugh. My apologies to those who haven't seen it, but bear with me. Set in the Middle Ages, this mob of peasants sees a young townswoman and ridiculously dresses her up as a witch. Brought before the town's noblemen, they beg to burn the would-be witch at the stake. So the nobleman asks how they know she's a witch. So they sheepishly point to her burlap cape, this tin funnel hat, and the fake wooden nose that they put on her and yell, "She's a witch! Burn her!" Now it's obvious that she's just a peasant woman wearing a twig nose. But caught up in the frenzy, the nobleman confirms she fits the bill, and the mob drags her off to the stake. So of course this scene is a parody of superstitions in the Dark Ages, and we laugh. But in every joke, there's a grain of truth. Due process is often drowned out by ignorance and mob justice. Loaded headlines in the court of public opinion give verdicts before we can blink. And even when wrong, the damage is done. A correction buried in paragraph 14 on page 6 of the news won't give back reputations or restore public standing. Due process is a cornerstone of justice. It assures our day in court to face our accusers. And this attribute of justice isn't new. It was crucial to the Roman Empire, to the nation of Israel, and central to our own laws. Justice is a major theme in the scriptures, mentioning the word just or justice over 400 times. So at first read, our text today seems to be the prime example of the perversion of justice. But if we really look today, we'll see a God who came to make all things right, exposing the wicked and setting free those bound by injustice. In all 4 gospel accounts, we have details of Jesus' trial before the Jewish leadership, Pilate, King Herod. The Jewish council spearheaded Jesus' prosecution, and they were the first to bring his ministry before judgment. In a haphazard sham of a trial, Jesus was mocked, assaulted, wrongfully accused, convicted, and sentenced to death. This Jewish council presiding over his case broke dozens of civil and religious laws specifically designed to ensure due process. For instance, Jewish law only permitted trials and proceedings in the light of day. Yet Jesus was tried under the cover of night. Jesus' sentence was given by Caiaphas, the high priest, but only after he tore his robe in anger. Yet the moment Caiaphas tore his robe, he should have been immediately removed as high priest and therefore unable to pass verdict. Levitical law instructed that any priest who tore his robe was immediately disqualified from service. So the next morning, this council brought Jesus before Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea. Rome had taken away much of Israel's self-governance, so the Jews needed Pilate to sign off on any conviction, especially if they wanted a death sentence. So when Pilate asked to hear the charges, I'm reminded of that scene from Monty Python. The Jews, totally avoiding Pilate's question, they respond, "Well, if he wasn't guilty, we wouldn't have brought him here." Now, the council's original charge, blasphemy, wouldn't have been much concern to the Roman governor, as it was only a crime per Jewish law. So in hollow pretense of submission to Roman laws, they switched the charge to treason, saying this man was forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar, and he was found saying he himself is a king. Treason was way more likely to get Pilate's attention, as any threat of a king or a kingdom other than Rome was a threat he had to deal with. But the Jews didn't actually care about treason. The Torah clearly taught that the Messiah would come as a king and restore the kingdom of Israel. Didn't they realize by asking Pilate to execute Jesus for treason against Rome, they brought precedent for Rome to extinguish any future king or kingdom of Israel? It's evident that this trial was lawless, with corrupt judges convicting an innocent man to death. But Jesus never said a word. Why didn't he stop the awful injustice? That morning before Pilate and the Jews, Jesus was on trial. But he stood before another judge, in another court, in another jurisdiction that Pilate and the Jews, none of them could see. And in this heavenly proceeding, Jesus willingly stood guilty as charged. His sentence, death, and total separation from his Father in heaven. The verdict and punishment would set the precedent for all eternity. You see, God is holy, and He's perfect, but we're not. In God's presence, there can be no corruption, no sin, and until the sin and death that separates us from God is done away with, we're unable to be together. But Jesus, who was without sin, allowed our sin to be placed in Him, and then standing in place for us, He faced its full consequence. Jesus was declared guilty, so we would be acquitted. As He was led away to serve this unthinkable sentence, we were spared from the judgment we deserved. Isaiah foretold of this heavenly trial. In chapter 53, it reads, "He was oppressed and treated harshly, yet He never said a word. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, yet He did not open His mouth. Unjustly condemned, He was led away, but it was the Lord's good plan, as it was His life that made an offering for our sin. Out of the anguish of His soul, He shall see justice and be satisfied, and by His knowledge, God's righteous servant will make many righteous, as He shall bear their iniquities." So in perfect justice and perfect love, God allowed Jesus to become sin for us so we could become the righteousness of God. As Jesus took our guilt, we were cloaked in His righteousness, and because of His sacrifice, we're now able to be in the presence of God, now and forever. So in whatever circumstance we face, when it seems the wicked and the unjust prosper, we can know God is one who makes all things right.